Hello out there again in the gaming world. I am CdrMcNeil. Welcome to another edition of East Meets West Gaming, and today we're doing Star Trek Online. A very specific, actually, element of the game, as I'm answering a request. I've had actually a few messages hit my YouTube inbox after I posted my, essentially the new featured episode, the Season 9 episode, playthrough where I play the mission, and everyone was wondering, what the heck kind of ship was I using, because I seem to just be burning through enemies. Now, understand, a lot of this loadout is due to the mentorship and learning that I have received from the United Federation of Planets, or UFP fleet. Please check them out, ufplanets.com. They are a great bunch of players. They really will help you out with your loadouts, with your walkthroughs, any problem you may have in the game Star Trek Online. This group of players can help you out with, and it's also a fun bunch of players to play with. Since I am broadcasting from Yokosuka, Japan, I have decided to park my ship right above Japan. I am, let's see, Mura is right here, so I'm right here in Yokosuka. That little dot right there. Okay, so this is a ship I used. Now specifically, this is the Fleet Advanced Escort, or as some people know it as the Fleet Multi-Vector Assault Mode. I originally had a C-Store purchased multi-vector assault mode ship with the MVAM console installed. I'll here to refer to multi-vector as MVAM, just for your edification. And then a friend of mine in UFP actually said, hey, we want you to roll with the fleet variant for the no-win scenario. So he threw a fleet module at me, and I was able to pick one up. If you do not have the C-Store variant, this thing will cost you 4 fleet modules, so just be aware. But it's pretty darn good. I have a fairly basic loadout, actually. I'm not using any fleet-built goods. I know a lot of guys have much more advanced consoles and weapon systems than I do, so I'm using pretty much all store-bought, all exchange-purchased items. So this should be actually a fairly easy build for a lot of you to pick up. Some of the items are from Reputation, but go ahead and substitute the next best, and you can probably get away with it. So first we'll go into the weapons loadout. So let me bring up the screen here. So here we are, USS Yamato, my Fleet Advanced Escort, NCC 93705C. This is actually the third ship I've had of this type, with this name. So some of the base stats here: crew complement of 150, recovery rate of 50% per minute, stealth detection ration of 22.2, power transfer rate 154%. Defense, currently garbage, minus 5.0. Hull, fairly decent hull, about 47,000 hit points. It definitely cannot take these things on the chin. It's not meant as a staying ship. It's not a cruiser, but boy, can it put out a lot of damage. Hull repair rate's fairly decent, 161%. Shield regenerate, 171.6 shield. And then you see my shields. I'm at 9,000 across the board on each facing. My resists are pretty much 32% across the board. Attack, 27.3 bonus accuracy, 4.2% crit chance, 66.8% crit severity. So, and pretty much baseline skill base there. I'm not going to go into that. Movement, very maneuverable ship. This thing is very zippy. 60 inertia, 25.8 flight speed, 5.8 degree per second turn. So pretty darn good. It's definitely quick and nimble enough for me to bring my cannons on target. Speaking of cannons, what am I carrying? Well, I am carrying the phaser quad cannons, damage time form. These actually come with the Sao Paulo class C4 vessel, the Defiant, that you can pick up. Just as a side note, you don't have to run with these. I like to run with them because I like the extra damage, and I'm using them in a PvE environment. If you're using them in PvP, though, you'll want to go with, say, dual heavy cannons with an accuracy bonus, or fleet cannons if you can afford them. Reason being is that while these things put out more damage, they're less accurate, and when you're in a PvP environment, they're not that great. But if you're in a PvE environment where your chance of hitting your target is actually usually pretty good, particularly when you're running, say, Omega SDFs, where you're going up against the Borg, and they're big bloody cubes, which just, I mean, it's a big freaking wall. If you can't hit that, then you've got bigger problems. So I tend to side with the phaser quad cannons, and I just like the way phaser quad cannons sound. it's more of an aesthetic choice than more of a any other choice. The rest of the stuff is the other two cannons are dual heavy cannons. In this case, I've gone with an accuracy and a crit damage mod ×2, and a critical damage and a damage ×2 mod. Once again, I'm running in a PvE environment, so if you're running PvP, accuracy is going to be more of your friend there, particularly when you're dealing with other escorts. I use the gravimetric photon torpedo launcher. This is available through the Dyson Sphere reputation system. Highly recommend that you grab yourself one of these. These things are great. Couple that with torpedo spread. The fact that this thing can trigger essentially a small little gravimetric rift. And when you're going up against the Borg and you've got a science buddy who suddenly zaps them with the gravity well, pulls them all together, you lock on with torpedo spread and just fill them with torps. Between the gravity well, the torp damage, and the gravimetric rifts that can form, you're talking a lot of damage. It's really great for crowd control. And even by itself, it's a pretty darn good torpedo. Now, if you don't have it, or don't have the reputation for it, quantum torpedoes tends to be the best way to go. They'll just give you the best DPS across the board. Some people prefer photons. I'd say quantums. You can also substitute the Omega Plasma Torpedo Launcher because there are other Omega Rep weapon systems in this build, so you can get the bonus if you want. And sometimes I have swapped out the gravimetrics for the Omegas because I do kind of like that rapid reload capability, the fact that I can keep shooting a lot of torps. But since I'm not using high yield or any of those other capabilities, the Omega Torp is not as good, at least from my playstyle. So do with that what you will. Now, this is actually kitted out primarily because I was trying to run with the no-win scenario and improve my survivability. I'm probably going to swap out these slots here with maybe more damage-oriented. Maybe go back to an Omega set. I've also got, some of there's the Romulan Riemann sets which are available. So I'm still hemming and hawing, but right now this is what I've got loaded. It is a Dyson, the Solene Deflector Array Mark 12. The Solene Hyper-Efficient Impulse Engines, Mark 12. The Solene Overcharged Warp Core, Mark 12. And the Solene Resilient Shield Array. So I've got essentially the 4-set bonus. That gives me the Metaphysics Shields. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But that gives me that Metaphysics Shield capability, the better structural integrity, cyclical. It's a much more survivable tool. Now, this does not turn this ship into a cruiser, but it does help when you suddenly become primary, because generally if I need to get the enemy's attention, all I need to do is point my nose at them and start shooting. So that tends to get their attention pretty quick, no matter how much threat generation my fellow cruisers are doing to try to help me out. So it is kind of a catch-22 in that regard. So sometimes you do need that extra buff in terms of survivability, so you can, get the hell out of here. If you don't have the Solene set, a damage-oriented or shield-oriented warp core, though I'd say damage is probably better for you, plus the Aegis set, which is fairly easily acquired, is a pretty good substitute if you're looking to improve your survivability just a little bit. So that's just what I'm running in those slots. For my aft weapon slots, I'm running the Kinetic Cutting Beam, which is just a must. Get that from the, once again, the Omega Rep Store. Almost every build I ever run, cruiser, escort, even science vessel, I am running the cutting beam. It's a 360-degree arc weapon that does darn near more damage than almost any other 360-degree arc weapon. It's a great tool. The only other time I find myself not using it is when I'm using like the omnidirectional anti-proton weapon, which I'm using for, say, an anti-proton ship build. But in this case, where I'm running phasers, the Kinetic Cutting Beam is great, and particularly you get that 2-set bonus also with the other Omega mod, because quite frankly, everybody should be running a simulated module. If you're not running a simulated module, you need to get yourself on a simulated module. Simulated module, get there right now. Okay. The other two weapons are phaser turrets, just standard 360-degree weapons, because I am putting my bow on my target. I am not broadsiding here. I know some people who run beams on this. I don't recommend it. It's an escort. You're talking DPS. Beams give you a little bit. They give you that wider firing arc, but that's, most of you, if you're at this point in the game where you're looking at fleet ships, you already know. But if you're not familiar with the way these systems work, you want to, if you're running an escort, you're running cannons. You've got the agility. You can keep your nose on target. And since you're going to be using your forward weapons more often, you want to buff that damage bonus. You don't want to make your aft weapons useless. So an omnidirectional, anti-proton beam or the kinetic cutting beam, followed up by standard turrets, 360-degree arc turrets, are the systems you want to run for weapons. Once again, these are all Mark 12 very rares, and I picked all of them up from the exchange. So pretty easy to acquire. Okay, so for my devices, I'm using the subspace field modulator, which virtually everyone should use, except when you're facing the Voth, because then going to minus 400 proton resistance is a bad idea. But in almost any other scenario, being able to plop this thing is great. And then I backed it up with just a standard heavy plasma satellite turret. I really have no other special devices locked in on this one. A battery may also be a good thing, or the ablative Jevanite hardpoints. If you've got the money, get yourself one of these. This will just add your structural integrity. But if you are going to swap out, say, a turret or something like that, like a weapons battery or a team battery, is a good idea. Just buff that weapons power. Okay, so for my engineering consoles, I'm running Mark 11s. So I'm not running that high. Notice I've only got Mark 11s available to me. Essentially, Mark 11 neutronium alloys. This gives you, across the board, 18.8 kinetic and 18.8 energy damage resistance. So instead of, it gives you a good all-around defense. Now, you can go with more specific hull plating if you know exactly what you're going to be facing off against. But since I'm a little lazy and I don't like swapping out parts and pieces all the time, I just go with the straight neutroniums. C'est la vie. I've got enough repair kits so that if I go down, I go down. And that's what I'm talking Omega STFs and things of that nature. But since this thing's zippy enough, I can get in and out of trouble quickly enough. And since I've got some good teammates, particularly we've got some excellent science captains in UF Planets, it's not as big of a problem. In terms of, oh crud, I just became primary, they're all shooting at me, I really need that heavy survivability. In my case, I don't really need that. Neutronium just gives you that good across the board damage resists. Once again, you may want to go for more specific plating depending on your need. But if you're just looking for a good default, Neutronium Alley, you can't go wrong. Mark 12's a little expensive. They're kind of hard to come by. So if you don't get the cash, I wouldn't recommend it. So Mark 11's a good compromise. Okay, for my science consoles, I kind of went for a mix of the more esoteric universal consoles, with the exception of the last console, which is a field generator. I did that to buff my shield capacity. Once again, because we were running no-win scenario, I needed just that little bit more survivability when I became primary, so I could get the heck out of Dodge and heal up. So having that extra 20% capacity does help. But if you have got really good engineer and science captains along for the ride, and they've got you essentially on their watch list and they can keep you alive, you may want to swap this out for something else. The Alachi module, a 0-point energy, these are things to look at. So just kind of way to think about that. I do like my 0-point energy console that adds power to all the ships and it increases your crit chance. Highly recommended when you get the chance, but for now I'm running the another good console to think of is Plasmonic Leech. I mean, come on, you're stealing their power and adding it to your own. What's not to like? So, or well, actually this is beam, so you don't need this one. So, but anyways, I would not recommend running shield emitter amplifiers because your shield rate is already, your shield capacity is already so low. Yeah, okay, you've got an increased shield regen rate, but they're eating through your shield so quickly that the regen won't be able to make up for it. So you kind of want to roll more with the raw capacity. Just give them that much more to have to chew through rather than hope that your regen rate being buffed can save you. The other two modules are Tactio-Kinetic. Of course, improves your flight turn rate, which is awesome. I mean, the ship's already zippy as it is, so why not take a little bit more? But it's the crit chance and crit severity that's also really nice. Those are really good to use. I've also got, it also gives a bonus to graviton generators, which is great because I am running, some graviton-based skills, transporter, actually truck to beam repulsors and gravity well. And finally, on my science consoles, I'm using the assimilated module, and why not? Because of reasons. Everyone should be running an assimilated module. If you're not running an assimilated module, get there. All right. And the final console slot, should it do I even need to announce it? It's all phaser damage mods. Everybody should be running pure damage mods in your tactical slots. Granted, that's my opinion. Some people disagree with that. But I'm of the opinion that if you want to play with universal console slots, you're playing with your science and your engineerings. If you are an escort, you're using your tactical slots for damage mods. Just straight up damage. Buff it as much as you can. Now, for actual skills that are being used on the ship, we'll move this up a little bit. I'm using Attack Pattern Alpha 3 specifically. Attack Pattern Omega 3, which I can train to my officers, so I've trained that to my officers. Cannon Scatter Volley. Now, Scatter Volley versus Rapid Fire. I prefer Scatter Volley. I like to be able to do crowd control, be able to manage groups of enemies, particularly when I'm playing, say, the... oh gosh, just I believe it's Kittimer. Or even more so, the Cure space, particularly when you have to defend the Kang, and you want to be able to burn down groups of enemies quickly. Scatter Volley is a good way to go. Keeping with that style of attack, Torpedo Spread, Torp Spread 1 is what I've got on my character here, so pretty good to use. The other tactical skills above that, of course, we have Fire at Will, or excuse me, Fire on my Mark, Fire on my Mark 3, which came with my abilities. Attack Pattern Bravo, Beta? Yeah, okay. English is my primary language, if you didn't know. Attack Pattern Beta, it's also great. Remove that damage. You couple that with Scatter Volley. You hit that and then back it right up with that and just wail on them and just watch them die. I've got a lot of attack teams. This is going to change because right now the way I've got my BOF set up is I've got way too many attack teams. I know this. And it's mostly because I don't have a BOF with a different number 1 slot right now. Almost all of them, their first slot is tactical team, and that's because I use other builds that use beams and other setups, and I've got different BOFs. So I need to actually expand my BOF slot and probably get one more tactical guy and just have them have some sort of different tier 1 or change out her tier 1 ability, because I've got Tac Team 3 times here. Tac Team 2 and Tac Team 1 I will run back to back because I do like constantly spamming Tactical Team. It reduces the cooldowns, it's a great tool to use, particularly for an escort, so I'm constantly firing off Tac Team. And then of course Tactical Initiative 3 to reduce the cooldowns on all of my tactical abilities. On the engineering side of the house, pretty simple. Emergency power to weapons and an aux to bat. I'm not really using a lot of auxiliary skills anyways, so I tend to use aux to bat more often just to buff the rest of the stuff here. Aux to win, as they like to call it. Other engineering style or related skills, I have evasive maneuvering and brace for impact 3. Science skills, also fairly limited. I'm using hazard emitters because everyone should be using hazard emitters. Tractor beam repulsors and gravity well. Tractor beam repulsors is a leftover from playing no win scenario, pushing the bad guys back. It is a nice tool to use, but I found I've used it in other situations, like some of the Borg STFs. It's pretty darn useful. For now, kind of secondary skills that come with the hull or special devices. Of course, I've got my fleet support, which is whenever I'm about to die, which is often. Go down fighting, also useful to have. Of course, there's the turrets. Battery capacitor. Now, why battery capacitor? Well, battery capacitor comes with the solenoid warp core, and it's more of a side effect of using the solenoid set than a conscious decision to actually go after the battery capacitor capability. So I've started using it in a kind of a unique way. There's 2 ways I use it. First of which is excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt there. First of which I use is I'll drop that, activate this. That'll see my aux jump. Follow that up by aux to bat. Suddenly, all of my auxiliary skill gets dispersed across all this. I jump it to max, then disperse it. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is when I need some serious crowd control. Fire that off, follow that up with a gravity well. So my aux skill goes max, fire that grav well right into it, it improves the capability of the gravity well, and then I can follow it up with scatter volley and torpedo spread. So there's kind of a direct sequence of events. Battery capacitor, hit them with the gravity well, get them all sucked together. If I've got beta ready and not on cooldown, beta followed up, alpha then beta, scatter volley, torp spread, and just let them have it. And it's a great tool to use it. And I'm finding I'm able to burn through mass waves of, say, Borg vessels really quickly when I'm doing that. So that's really good. Okay. Other capabilities. Tactical fleet. Everybody's got tactical fleet. If you're a tactical captain. If you are playing together and you've got voice comms, please let each other know when you're actually dropping tac fleet so you guys don't overlap. But it's really good to have. Subspace fuel modulator. Don't leave home without it. And because I'm also using the Solonay set, I am running the advanced metaphasic shields. So that's a good tool to have. That is my oh my god, I'm about to die button. I hit that and then I start running. It's a great tool to use to help deflect your damage. Helps heal your shields, gets you moving again. It's a great tool. Of course, its cooldown is really long, but it's a great tool to have. Power settings. Of course, I'm very much on a weapons bent, so I'm right now set to 123 weapons power, 67 shield, 44 engine, and then 55 aux. That's buffed primarily because of the Solonay set. The engine power actually doesn't affect me all that much. I'm able to move fairly quickly. I'm a little bit behind the rest of the team in terms of raw movement speed, but it's not actually a bad thing because we usually want our cruisers to open up first and draw the attention of the enemy so then I can follow up with the attack. Because if I start shooting first, I suddenly become primary. And this ship just can't handle just being under sustained barrage from everybody else. So usually that's a good way to get around it is by letting the cruisers in first. So, alright, so that pretty much covers it. Understand, of course, now the rep systems have changed, so you're no longer able to select or highlight exactly which skills simultaneously. I did have most of my skills here oriented towards damage and critical capability. So, that's about it. That is the USS Yamato, the Fleet Advanced Escort. You can do a similar build with the C-Store variant. The multi-vector assault module that comes with the C-Store variant is pretty cool. It's a fun console to play with, particularly when running with one ship is just bleh. So when you need more than one, the multi-vector is pretty cool to have. That said, having the extra damage mod does help, and I wouldn't sacrifice, say, one of the engineering or science consoles for something else other than that. But if you really want to run with it, you may want to swap out for a tactical slot. I know I'm kind of breaking my own rule there, but to keep the other damage mods in place, and the other critical damage mods like the tachyokinetic and the assimilated module, you may want to. But understand you are going to take a hit in your DPS when you do that. And the survivability, excuse me, I'm fighting off some yawns here. The survivability, of course, of your ship drops a lot, and particularly of your pets when you do access multi-vector. For some reason, the guys, the other parts of the ship and the multi-vector tend to draw a lot of aggro. They attack a lot of random targets, and the other problem is that they just don't last very long. They tend to die pretty quick, and they don't run away when there's another ship about to explode right next to them. So they take a lot of damage, and generally the only way you can get them healed, if you're not using engineering team or something like that, is to put your ship back together, which then you got to wait for the cooldown to reactivate, and by that time your cannons may have done so much damage. Now, I caveat that with having the extra ships and the extra firepower is actually not a bad thing sometimes. Additionally, them drawing fire and dying is also not a bad thing, particularly if you're solo. So if you're running solo or you're not running with a coordinated team, the multi-vector module might be a good thing to have, if only because it gives your enemy that many more targets to shoot at, which allows you to stay on station and continue wailing with them. So, all right. Well, that, as they say, is that. This concludes my loadout, and hopefully you've learned something. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments box below, or hit me up on a personal message. Hopefully I'll be available to quickly answer any questions you may have. And if you like what you see, I might do this again for some of my other ship builds. For good ideas, please check out STO Academy. That's a great website. You can look at ship builds if you're kind of stuck and wondering how should I put my ship together. You get some good inspiration there. There are some joke builds, but you also get a lot of good ideas on how to build your ship. So, that, as they say, is that. Thanks for coming out, folks. Hope you've enjoyed the ride. This is Commander McNeil, signing off.